Hello everybody, welcome to this week's live stream. An hour after the payrolls have come out, the US unemployment numbers, how exciting. The markets like it so far. This is the NASDAQ. So just before the payrolls, where is it trading? 19,848. It traded up to 20,050. So what's that? 200 points, 200 point bump off the payrolls. Let's see what happens the rest of this afternoon. I think that was interesting. If you're new to this, welcome to the live stream. I normally do this every Friday at 2:30 UK time, just as the US markets are opening. We're in for about half an hour, and we'll have a look at a whole mix of different markets, whatever you want to look at. I'll have a look at indices, gold, oil. What else do we look at? Some currencies, a little bit of everything. And then if there's any markets you want looking at, if you put it in the chat on YouTube, we'll take a look at those once we've been through all that stuff. It's been an interesting week. It's been an okay week for me. I haven't done much the last couple of days. I did trade the DAX a few times, the German market, beginning of the week, and that did all right. And it's sort of rocketed away since then, so I've not been able to get onto it. But overall, good week. I think it's interesting, though, with these indices, if you look at... We'll have a look at this in a bit more detail in a second. The DAX is trading at 23,000. The all-time high was only under 23 and a half. So we're what's that? 2% away from all-time highs. US markets are still a way off it, but clearly the bounce back that started is still going. So it's all. I think indices, for me, are probably the most interesting markets at the moment, and we'll get into it in a second. But before we do all that, let's just go through some housekeeping. The presentation is only for educational purposes. It does not contain and should not be construed as containing investment advice or an investment recommendation or an offer of or solicitation for a transaction in any financial instrument. David Jones accepts no responsibility for any use that may be made of these comments and for any consequences that result. You should consider whether you understand how spread bets, contracts for difference, futures, foreign exchange work, and whether you can afford to take the high risk of losing your money. Trading is risky. Okay, that's that. Let's get into it. So looking ahead to next week, there's an obvious big one next week, but on Monday, we've got the US ISM data out on Monday, giving us perhaps a bit of a sample of how the economy is doing. We had those weak US numbers this week that saw the market sell off initially and then bounce back really strongly. Wednesday, we got the US interest rate decision. That's the big one. Wednesday evening. And as is often the case, it's the minutes and the press conference around that can really sort of spice up markets and add some volatility, giving us a taste perhaps of what the US Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, where they see interest rates going, what they think about the economy, all of that stuff. Then on Thursday, we've got the UK rate decision, Thursday lunchtime in the UK. So focus on interest rates next week. So that's that. I run a WhatsApp group. We'll talk about it a bit more after we've had a look at markets. But for now, let's go and have a look. Let's start off with US markets. Let's start off with the S&P. Let's clear things up a bit here. That recovery off the lows in very early April, it hit 4,800 in the out of hours market at the beginning of April. It's now trading at nearly 57. So what's that? 900 points, almost 20%. 15% plus bounce back off the lows at the beginning of April. A strong rally. And the rally continues. That was that. I thought it was an interesting move this week. I think it told us a lot. I thought the move on Wednesday. So it sold off. This is Wednesday's trade. It sold off on that. The US economic number being the worst it had been for a long time. Sold off in the first 20 minutes or so, and then turned around. And here we are. So even though on the face of it the news looks bad, the market has bounced back strongly, and here we are trading at the highest level it's been since when? Beginning of April. So it's a month, isn't it? Give or take at the odd day. We're a month at month highs for US indices. So I think it's interesting. The bounce back continues. I would still be a buyer of a dip. That's the nutshell approach for me for US indices. We've still got a bit further to go till the next barrier. I think perhaps, would you say the worst is behind us? For the US, I'd still be a bit cautious on that. We had the all-time highs only going back to the middle of February. We have had since then lower highs all the way down. I think for me, this is the one to watch. It's the late March highs on the S&P. Let's call it 5,800. So about 3% higher than where we are now. But in the short to medium term at least, I would be a buyer of the dip. I was hoping, and absolutely it could still happen, do we get a bit of a sell-off yesterday that has a look at yesterday's lows? Sell-off later today, I mean, and it has a look at yesterday's lows. So I'll be a buyer if we saw that happen. If we have a look at the NASDAQ, it's a similar story there. There we go. So the NASDAQ, we haven't taken out the last major high on the daily chart, which for me is up above 20,300. It's almost 400 points away from that, a couple of percent away from that. Let's see what happens. I think it makes for an interesting week next week. And again, the NASDAQ for today, my approach would be the same. Does it sell off towards yesterday's low? Yesterday's in-session low was set in the last 10 minutes. And it's that candle here. And then we had the out-of-hours stuff where the market went lower. So I'd be watching 19,750, let's call it, on the NASDAQ this afternoon. So it's a couple of hundred points below where we are now. So I think that would be interesting, perhaps an interesting opportunity if the market trades down there. But again, it's had a great bounce back in April after that absolutely nail whitening ride, white knuckle ride, not white nails, white knuckle, that white knuckle dive at the beginning of April. I mean, where did it go? Beginning of April. So it traded as high as 19,850 and it was 16,500 a couple of days later. Is it 10% fall? Pretty much, isn't it? So interesting. And interesting to see, next week there's the level. You can see the level. What's going to happen? 20,300 and a bit. What's going to happen next week? Let's see. Is this where we see markets start to get nervous again? Does something that gets said in the Fed meeting next week spark off some weakness? Let's see. If you were thinking, look, we haven't seen the worst in US markets yet, then next week could well be a prime shorting opportunity. See what happens. But for now, in the short term, I'll still be a buyer of the dip. The DAX, I mentioned the DAX. I've traded that quite a bit the last few weeks, and it's been a great trend. Let's take these off, and the trend is still going. That trend is still going. Like I say, it's within a few hundred points of the all-time high. It's been a stronger performer, I'd suggest, than US markets have been. What's it rallied? So let's call it 19,000 was the low. We're 23,000 now, so it's a 20% rally and a bit off the lows for April. Let's see what happens. But it's been a great trend. So I've been a buyer of the weakness over the last couple of weeks, and like I say, I've missed it the last couple of days. But that trend is still strong. Let's see what happens up at these all-time highs. I thought I'd mention the Spanish index as well, because that's almost there. The Spain 35. Let's just get rid of that for now. So the all-time high in the Spanish index was 13,520. And this week it did trade as high as 13,492. So within 30 points of the all-time high. So that for me is an interesting one to watch. Do we get the breakout in the Spanish next week? Let's see what happens. So lots going on with those indices. And the FTSE, the FTSE's having a bit of a day after a bit of a quiet week for the FTSE. So the FTSE's got to move on in the last hour or so. And again, for me, it's, there's maybe some hurdles left for the FTSE. But really interesting time, considering, what we've been through for stock markets in the last, what's it been now, 2 months, 2.5 months, and this strong bounce back in April. Is this the resumption of the longer term bull market, or actually is this the great opportunity to go short before the rug gets pulled again and the markets collapse. Who knows? I don't know. Yeah, let's see. So really interesting May ahead, I think. So that's a quick look at those. This is a quick look at the Japanese market. I did wonder if that was a short. Actually, it's moved slightly different than Nikkei to some of these other markets. You know, it peaked in Jan and it had been sliding before other markets started sliding. The Japanese market, and there's a little trend line I drew on it earlier in the week. And you know, again, if you thought the Japanese market, this was just a dead cat bounce in that overall downtrend, then there's the argument to be a seller, maybe one for early next week. So loads to watch, just in stock market indices. I think loads to watch. So they've definitely been the interesting market for me. Other stuff, dollar index. A lot of stuff is a little bit boring at the moment, and I think because of the sidewaysness that we're seeing in the dollar index, or we have seen in the dollar index over the last couple of weeks, this is a reason for it. So a lot of FX markets are a bit flip-flop. You know, it had a bit of a run of strength, the dollar index, earlier this week, but the old highs are up, or the old highs from mid-April still held. So for me, it's a bit boring still. You know, I think the trade on the dollar index, the contrarian trade, you know, if you thought the market overshooting the 2023 lows was an overreaction by the dollar, you know, it's had a big slide from the highs in January, then the contrarian trade is to be a buyer with a stop underneath that April low. You know, that's one thing. Perhaps want to be a bit more patient, but I think that's an interesting trade perhaps. But overall, the dollar has been pretty flip-flop. So lots of other markets, lots of the currency markets, obviously quoted against the dollar, have not been the most exciting in the last few weeks. Gold has taken a little bit of a beating. Gold, so gold all-time highs at 3,500 in April. Last week, a week last Tuesday. Is this a buying opportunity? I mean, I would still be buying the dip on gold. You know, the big trend is obviously still up. This is the daily chart we're looking at. The big trend is up. Let's flip it over to the hourlies. You know, the market has sold off, and did sort of turn around a bit yesterday, 3,200. I've got these old levels on my chart. The low from mid-April, just before it rocketed out to all-time highs again. So 3,185, 3,185. It's a bit of a market for me, a bit of a level for me. The old all-time highs earlier in April, around about 3,165. So I think, you know, if I was a buyer today, and I'd want to see at least see where it's trading on Monday. You know, it was only yesterday it made a new low for that down move. But if I was a buyer early next week, you know, I'd be thinking about stops the other side of 3,165. You know, so interesting to see what happens with gold. You know, obviously with stock markets bouncing back, it's, you know, lost some of its appeal for now, at least as a safe haven. You know, so dollar weakness helped. Dollar weakness has been a bit flip-flop. Dollar's been a bit flip-flop recently. So, but it still had an amazing year. You know, gold. Where did gold come into this year? 2,600. You know, even where it is now, it's up 600 points, 25%, something like that for the year to date. So, yeah. So I'd still personally be thinking about being a buyer of the dip in gold. Interesting one to watch next week, I think. Silver, I hardly ever look at silver. I mean, you know, it's just we had a multi-year high in October last year, and since then it's just been a broad sideways range. So it's not the most interesting market for me at the moment, silver. So yeah, not too much excitement for me in that one. Bitcoin always nudging a little bit higher again today. You know, obviously the big trend for Bitcoin is still up, going back to those, well, no, whatever we go back to, November 22. So 2.5 years, the trend is up. It traded up to 108, 109 earlier this year, dropped back. The old highs at 74 have held. I'd be a buyer of the dip. That's about it really on Bitcoin. You know, the big trend is up, and that's it really on that. Oil, I think oil's interesting. I thought there was going to be a bounce in oil this This is the hourly now, but we haven't had it. But I think what's interesting in oil, this low from April, that is down at $55 on my chart. That's the lowest we've seen oil since Feb 21. So oil touched a 4-year low, this year. So if you wanted to be a buyer of oil, from a more medium-term point of view, well, we're back down to levels that did see it bounce sharply in April, but bearing in mind the trend since, if you go back to the Russian invasion of Ukraine 3 years ago, that trend is still arguably down. So I think it is interesting down here. So for me, that's the level to watch. Around about $55 a barrel, the lows from earlier in April. There you go. We can see them on that chart there a bit clearly. And it did have a bit of a bounce yesterday. So I think that's maybe an interesting market. Another interesting market to watch next week is the price of oil. Do we see 55 hold, or does it slip to another 4-year low? Don't know. I'd be sort of leaning towards being a buyer in the short term, but I think if 55 breaks, it'd be a major break, So let's see what happens next week. Natural gas has had a bit of a turnaround this week. Crazy old market, natural gas as usual. But we had multi-year highs in natural gas, just shy of $5 in March. So that was the best level for natural gas since December 22. So a 2-year high in March. And I've had these levels marked up for a while on my chart. It's interesting that the lows from December before the market took off again, they have held again so far. So you could make the argument of buying the dip in natural gas, whether you buy it here or whether you wait for a sell-off, who knows. But at the moment, based on the dailies, I would have a stop the other side of those early December lows, So so interesting next week if we get a bit of a drift back. Do we see the buyers come back in? So I think that's one to watch, I think, next week as well. And I think that's it, isn't it? Let's dip into some other markets. You can see, if you're looking like pound against the dollar, the pound very briefly hit its best levels since when? Feb 22, so 3-year highs. But we haven't seen any follow through yet. Let's see what happens. Again, it's also dollar dependent, isn't it? Until the dollar makes up what it's doing, perhaps we won't have too much excitement in these other markets. If we look at euro US dollar, similar there, hit a multi-year high earlier in April, drifted back. It's held off the old low so far. Let's see. The dollar really needs to make its mind up to see what's happening there. And in other stuff, what else is interesting? Live cattle, all-time highs, been a great trend. Live cattle, perhaps not, or definitely not the most widely watched markets out there by most of us, but I think that's an interesting market. I've only got data going back to June 21, so just under 4 years, but a great trend in live cattle. The breakout last year, and it's carried on this year. And what else? Sugar, I thought was interesting. Sugar is that breaking? Oh, that is breaking. So price of sugar, it's great. It had a great trend a few years back. Here we go, because I remember, because I was traded it a bit then, that trend. And it's coming back, and it's just today, the price of sugar is dropping below this support that's been in place since last summer. And then the big support from September 22, is the next one. So I think that's maybe an interesting market. If it breaks down, do we see the start of a new trend lower? So there's a few little bits and pieces in other markets. But for me, to go back really to what I was saying right at the beginning, it's the indices for me, because the trend has been very good during April. What happens now with these US markets next week? Do we see these highs from the third week of March taken out, and off we go and have a look at all-time highs again? Who'd have thought that a month ago? Or does the market start to roll over once again and we go bang back down? I don't know. Let's see what happens. It does, given, I would say that with all the tariff stuff, tariffs being paused, that was this day here, wasn't it? The pause on tariffs on that Wednesday 3 weeks ago. That's clearly lifted markets, but it is just a pause. But markets have continued to strengthen after a bit of a wobble the week after. So I think you could absolutely make the argument that we have seen the worst in US markets. There's always the risk, of course, that the US administration comes out with a bit of a curveball again and surprises everybody. So interesting times. But let's see what happens. European markets are stronger, relatively stronger. The DAX and the Spanish and even the old FTSE. So I think it's fascinating. I think what's going on in stock markets at the moment, and other markets are interesting, but perhaps not in the same. I've not had the same opportunities in other markets that they've been in US stocks. So in stock markets in general, and primarily the DAX for me. So let's see what happens next week. Do we see these markets continue to rally? Do we see the price of gold recover and that trend resume? Does the 4-year low in oil hold? It's only what, $3.5 below where we are now. So I think that's interesting. So loads to watch. If there's any stuff you want looking at, we'll take a look at Apple in a minute, because I've just seen that they're down 4% today. We'll take a look at those. If there's any stuff you want looking at, put it in the chat. But I run a WhatsApp group. Every day in the morning I do a daily update on markets I'm watching, what looks interesting. I talk about trades I'm running, trailing stops. There's a Q&A throughout the day. So if there's any markets you want looking at, you can fire it in. The link to the sign up is in the description to this video. If you use the code YouTube, you get 20% off the first month. So you can try it and see what you think about it. Most people do end up in there longer than a month, so that's good. So they're happy. It's a good little business for me. I'm happy, and I talk about all the trades and all the markets I'm watching, and then come back in the afternoon and do a US update. So if you'd like a bit more information from me on a daily basis from markets, it's not a signal channel, but I will talk about trends, where I would put stops, all that sort of stuff. Try it and see. I run a trading course as well, and to find out who I trade with, go to bit.ly/David Trade. Again, all of this in the description. Go to the website to find out more. But if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. My email address is dj@davidjonestrading.co.uk. I don't have all the answers, but I've been doing this a long time, so I can definitely give you an opinion. Okay, let's have a look at Apple, because I saw they've taken a bit of a hit at the open. So let's have a look at those. It's not that dramatic, is it? I mean, okay, it's a big fall off yesterday's earnings, last night's earnings. I mean, if I had to do a trade on Apple at the moment, there's absolutely the argument to be a seller, isn't there? Because if we pick up on the trend from the all-time highs, excuse me, back in end of last year, that trend is still down. It staged the rally into the earnings, had a little look through the highs, and it's gap lower today. So that's quite interesting, isn't it? If I was going short Apple, the tightest I'd have my stop is the other side of yesterday's high, 215. I probably prefer to have it the other side of 225. So, but interesting there. But if there are no questions, we'll wrap things up there. Everyone's enjoying the sunshine, I think. Far too hot to end on a very British comment. It's too hot, isn't it? We'll wrap things up there. I'll come back next week, come back next Friday, have a look at markets again next Friday. If you'd like to try the WhatsApp group, try it out, use the code YouTube. You can find details of the trading course I run at davidjonestrading.co.uk. You can see who I trade with at bit.ly/David Trade. So you can try those out. And any questions, drop me an email. But I think it'd be a really interesting week next week, particularly when it comes to stock market indices, because we have seen such a strong bounce back from that plunge beginning of April. And I think the question for next week is, can it continue? Or are these US markets going to run into hurdles from the third week of March? Let's see what happens. We'll wrap things up there. Enjoy the long weekend if you're in the UK or Europe. I don't know if they're having a long weekend there, who knows. But enjoy that. Otherwise, I'll be back on Friday. In the meantime, good luck with your trading and hopefully see you then.